The farmer tried to bury his old horse, but it did something that stopped him in his tracks. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the sprawling fields of Windhaven Farm in hues of gold and orange. The rustle of the breeze through the tall grass seemed to whisper stories of times long past, tales of labor, love, and resilience. For 60-year-old Nathaniel Nate Carver, those whispers had always been a source of comfort, but today they felt heavy with an unshakable sadness. Before we continue with the video and dive deeper into the incredible story, I want to ask for your help. I'm aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support would mean the world to me. If you've been enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. Standing near the weathered old barn, Nate glanced toward the paddock where his faithful horse Rusty grazed. Rusty was a chestnut gelding with a white blaze down his nose and a mane streaked with gray, a testament to his 25 years of life. Nate had raised him from a skittish colt to the steadfast companion who had plowed fields, herded cattle, and carried his children on their first rides. But time had taken its toll, and Rusty's once strong legs now wobbled under his weight. Nate ran a calloused hand through his silver-streaked hair, his heart aching with the decision he'd made. Rusty's deteriorating health had left him unable to eat properly or move without pain. The vet had gently suggested it was time to let him go, but Nate still struggled to accept it. The thought of burying Rusty, his partner, through decades of hardship and triumph felt like losing a part of himself. "Come on, boy," Nate called softly, his voice cracking. Rusty lifted his head, his tired eyes meeting Nate's. He let out a low nicker and limped toward him, each step a reminder of why Nate had made this choice. Rusty stopped beside him, pressing his head into Nate's chest as if offering silent reassurance. Nate blinked back tears, stroking the horse's coarse mane. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just want to do what's best for you." Later that evening, Nate grabbed a shovel and headed to the far edge of the property where an old oak tree stood sentinel over the land. It was a place of quiet beauty where the sunset bathed the rolling hills in soft light. He began digging, each thrust of the shovel into the earth pulling him deeper into memories of Rusty's younger days. The spirited gallops across open fields, the way he'd neigh to announce his presence whenever Nate entered the barn, and the countless times he'd been there to lift Nate's spirits. As the hole deepened, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the farm in the cool embrace of twilight. Nate wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning on the shovel to catch his breath. He looked back toward the barn, silhouetted against the dusky sky. Rusty's stable was quiet, and a pang of guilt twisted in Nate's chest. "I'm doing this for you," he muttered to himself, though the words felt hollow. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the silence, a faint rustling followed by the unmistakable thud of hooves on packed dirt. Nate's heart skipped a beat. He turned, squinting into the gloom. From the shadows emerged Rusty, moving with an urgency that belied his frail condition. The horse's ears were pinned back, his nostrils flaring as he approached the tree. "Rusty?" Nate dropped the shovel, rushing toward him. "What are you doing out here?" Rusty stopped a few paces away, his legs trembling, but his stance firm. He pawed at the ground with his front hoof, letting out a sharp whinny. Nate froze, his brow furrowing. Rusty pawed again, harder this time, sending a small plume of dust into the air. "What's gotten into you?" Nate asked, his voice laced with confusion. He stepped closer, only for Rusty to block his path, positioning himself between Nate and the half-dug hole. The horse snorted and pawed again, his movements growing more insistent. Nate's unease deepened. Rusty had never behaved like this before. It was as if the old horse was trying to tell him something, to stop him. But why? He glanced down at the ground where Rusty had been pawing. The earth looked undisturbed save for the hoof marks, yet something about the spot felt wrong. Nate knelt, running his hands over the soil. It was compact, with no sign of rocks or roots that might have drawn Rusty's attention. But as he pressed his palm to the ground, he felt a faint vibration, subtle but steady, like a heartbeat. "What the?" he muttered, his pulse quickening. Rusty let out another whinny, this one sharper and more urgent. Nate looked up at his horse, who now seemed calmer, as if he had succeeded in delivering his message. His large, intelligent eyes locked onto Nate's, filled with an emotion the farmer couldn't quite name. Determination, perhaps, or trust. "All right, boy," Nate said, standing slowly. "You win. I'll stop." He grabbed the shovel and began filling in the hole, his hands trembling with every scoop of dirt. Rusty stood vigil, his gaze unwavering as the ground was returned to its original state. When the last clump of earth was patted down, Nate leaned on the shovel and exhaled heavily. "Guess you're not ready to go yet," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Rusty stepped forward and nudged his shoulder gently, his breath warm against Nate's cheek. For the first time that day, Nate allowed himself to smile. But the questions lingered. Why had Rusty reacted so strongly? And what was that vibration beneath the ground? As Nate led Rusty back to the barn under the glow of the moon, he couldn't shake the feeling that the old horse had just saved them both from making a terrible mistake. And perhaps something far greater. Little did Nate know, Rusty's mysterious behavior was only the beginning of a revelation that would change their lives forever. The morning sun filtered through the barn's wooden slats, casting streaks of light over Rusty's stall. Nate leaned against the door, sipping his coffee and watching the old horse munch on a bucket of fresh hay. The previous night's events weighed heavily on his mind. Rusty had never been one to act irrationally, and his actions near the oak tree were far too deliberate to ignore. "You were trying to tell me something, weren't you?" Nate asked aloud. Rusty lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting Nate's, as if in response. "I just wish I knew what." Nate couldn't shake the faint vibration he'd felt in the ground. It wasn't natural. He was sure of that. After finishing his coffee, he decided he needed answers. Grabbing a shovel, a flashlight, and his trusty work gloves, he headed back to the oak tree. The morning air was crisp, the ground still damp with dew. As Nate approached the site, a peculiar sense of urgency quickened his steps. When he reached the spot, he knelt where Rusty had pawed the ground and pressed his hand to the soil again. The faint vibration was still there, pulsing steadily like a heartbeat. "What in the world?" he muttered, his brow furrowed. With Rusty's determined behavior fresh in his memory, Nate began digging, not to bury his beloved horse, but to uncover whatever was beneath the surface. The soil was dense and heavy, but years of working the land had made Nate strong and patient. Each shovelful brought him closer to an answer, though he had no idea what to expect. After an hour of digging, the blade of his shovel struck something solid. The sharp clang echoed through the quiet field, sending a shiver down Nate's spine. He knelt, brushing away the dirt with his hands to reveal a smooth, metallic surface. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. The object was large, flat, and appeared to be made of steel. As he uncovered more of it, Nate realized it wasn't just a random piece of scrap metal, it was too precisely shaped, too deliberate. A strange pattern of grooves and ridges ran across its surface, almost like an engraving. His pulse quickened as he cleared more dirt, revealing what looked like a hatch embedded in the ground. Nate sat back on his heels, staring at the uncovered object. A hatch on his land, near the tree where Rusty had stood guard. It didn't make any sense. The farm had been in his family for generations, and no one had ever mentioned anything unusual about this area. "Why here?" Nate murmured, his thoughts racing. He ran his fingers over the grooves, feeling for any kind of handle or latch. Finally, he found a small recessed lever. Hesitating for only a moment, Nate gave it a tentative tug. The hatch creaked, its hinges stiff with rust, but it opened with surprising ease. A rush of cool, stale air escaped, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent. Nate peered into the opening. A narrow shaft led downward, with a set of metal rungs bolted to the side. At the bottom, about 20 feet down, he could see the faint glint of something reflective, illuminated by the sunlight streaming in from above. "This keeps getting stranger," Nate muttered, grabbing his flashlight. He shone the beam into the shaft, revealing what appeared to be a small enclosed chamber. Steeling his nerves, he began his descent. The climb was slow and nerve-wracking. The rungs creaked under his weight, but they held firm. When he reached the bottom, Nate stepped onto a solid metal floor. The chamber was surprisingly clean, with walls made of the same steel as the hatch. In the center of the room sat a large cylindrical object covered in thick glass, its surface glowing faintly with a soft blue light. "What in God's name is this?" Nate whispered, approaching the cylinder. Inside the glass was a cluster of small crystalline objects, their jagged edges glinting like diamonds. They pulsed faintly, emitting the same vibration Nate had felt in the soil. The entire setup looked like something out of a science fiction movie, completely out of place beneath a humble farm. Nate reached out to touch the glass, but before his fingers could make contact, a low whinny echoed down the shaft. He turned sharply, his heart pounding. Rusty's head appeared at the edge of the hatch above, his ears flicking forward as he let out another call. "Rusty?" Nate called up, his voice shaky. "What are you doing up there, boy?" The horse stomped his hoof, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Nate felt a pang of unease. Rusty's behavior was too deliberate to ignore, as though he was trying to warn Nate of something. A sudden faint hum filled the air. The blue light within the cylinder grew brighter, and the vibrations intensified, shaking the walls of the chamber. Nate stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the glare. "What's happening?" he yelled, his voice echoing in the confined space. The light flared once more, then dimmed, leaving the chamber eerily silent. Nate's heart raced as he stared at the cylinder, which now appeared lifeless. Whatever energy had been coursing through it was gone. "All right," Nate muttered, his voice trembling. "I've seen enough." He climbed the rungs as quickly as he could, emerging into the sunlight to find Rusty waiting for him. The horse nickered softly, his gaze calm but intense. Nate patted his neck, grateful for the grounding presence of his old friend. "You knew, didn't you?" Nate whispered. "You've been trying to protect me this whole time." Rusty nuzzled Nate's shoulder, his warm breath reassuring. Nate glanced back at the hatch, now closed, and felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was down there, it wasn't meant for him or anyone else for that matter. As he led Rusty back to the barn, Nate couldn't shake the feeling that his discovery was just the beginning. The strange light, the vibration, Rusty's unyielding instincts, it all pointed to something much larger than he could comprehend. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, Nate was certain of one thing: he would face it with Rusty by his side. Little did he know, the events set in motion that day would soon bring answers and dangers that would change their lives forever. The days following Nate's discovery were a blur of restless nights and unanswered questions. He couldn't stop thinking about the hatch, the chamber, and the strange cylinder pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Rusty's behavior had only heightened his curiosity. The old horse remained vigilant, often standing in the field near the oak tree, his ears twitching at every sound. Nate felt torn. Part of him wanted to seal the hatch permanently and pretend he'd never seen it. But another part, the curious, determined side of him, knew he couldn't leave the mystery unresolved. One evening, Nate decided to confide in someone he trusted, his best friend, Claire, a local geologist with a knack for problem solving. Claire was someone Nate had grown up with, and if anyone could help him make sense of the situation, it was her. "So, let me get this straight," Claire said, leaning against the barn door as Nate recounted his discovery. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose braid, and her sharp green eyes narrowed with interest. "You found a hidden chamber under the oak tree, and it's glowing?" "Well, it was," Nate clarified, his hands resting on Rusty's mane. "It stopped after a while, but there's something strange about it. I need your expertise." Claire glanced at Rusty, who nickered softly. "And you think he led you to it?" "I don't just think, he did," Nate said firmly. "He wouldn't let me bury him, wouldn't leave the spot. Rusty has always been sharp, but this, it's like he knew." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "All right, let's take a look. But if this turns out to be an elaborate prank, I'm never letting you live it down." That evening, armed with a backpack full of tools and a scientific curiosity that rivaled Nate's apprehension, the two made their way to the oak tree. Rusty followed closely, his steady presence reassuring them both. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. When they reached the hatch, Nate pried it open, revealing the dark shaft below. Claire peered inside, her flashlight illuminating the metallic walls. "Well, you weren't kidding," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "This is definitely not a natural formation." They climbed down carefully, the cool air of the chamber wrapping around them like a shroud. Claire examined the cylinder, her fingers tracing the intricate grooves etched into its glass surface. "This is incredible," she said, pulling out a small instrument to measure the residual energy. "The material isn't anything I recognize. And these readings—" She paused, shaking her head. "Whatever powered this thing, it's not from around here." "What do you mean?" Nate asked, his stomach tightening. "I mean, it's not normal. This isn't just some old machinery. It's advanced, beyond anything we've developed. Claire's voice was steady, but her wide eyes betrayed her unease. Before Nate could respond, Rusty let out a sharp whinny from above. The sound echoed down the shaft, sending chills down Nate's spine. "Something's wrong," he said, his instincts kicking in. Rusty wouldn't call like that unless... Another whinny interrupted him, followed by the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats. Rusty was pacing near the hatch, his agitation clear. "We need to get out of here," Nate said, climbing the rungs with urgency. Claire followed, her flashlight clutched tightly. When they emerged into the open air, Rusty immediately trotted to Nate, nudging him insistently with his nose. His normally calm demeanor was replaced by an urgency that sent Nate's pulse racing. "What is it, boy?" Nate asked, scanning the field. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the dark expanse of the farm under the moonlight. But then, in the distance, he noticed a faint flicker of light near the far edge of the property. Claire saw it too. "Is that fire?" Nate's heart dropped. "It's the eastern field," he said, already moving toward Rusty's saddle. "That's where the equipment shed is." Rusty neighed, as if urging Nate to hurry. Claire grabbed her phone and dialed the fire department, shouting directions as she sprinted after him. When they reached the edge of the field, the sight that greeted them was worse than Nate had feared. Flames licked the sides of the equipment shed, their orange glow casting eerie shadows across the ground. The fire was spreading fast, fueled by the dry summer grass and the contents of the shed. Nate dismounted and ran toward the nearest water pump, his mind racing. "We need to contain this before it spreads to the barn." Rusty, as if sensing the urgency, darted toward the barn. Nate called after him, but the horse didn't stop. Instead, he ran around the structure, pawing at the ground near the irrigation controls. "Rusty, what are you doing?" Nate yelled, frustration mingling with panic. But Claire, who had caught up, grabbed Nate's arm. "Wait, he's on to something." They watched in amazement as Rusty stomped on the release valve for the irrigation system. Water sprayed out in powerful jets, creating a barrier around the barn and dampening the grass. Rusty then trotted toward the flames, positioning himself between the fire and the barn, as if daring the flames to advance. "He's protecting the barn," Claire whispered, her voice filled with awe. Nate didn't waste another second. With Claire's help, he used buckets of water to douse the flames, while Rusty kept a watchful eye on the spreading fire. After what felt like an eternity, the fire department arrived, quickly extinguishing the remaining flames and securing the area. As the firefighters packed up their gear, the fire chief approached Nate. "You're lucky you contained it when you did," he said. "Another 5 minutes, and the barn would have been a goner." Nate nodded, his gaze fixed on Rusty. The horse stood near the barn, his coat glistening with sweat, but his posture proud and unyielding. Nate approached him slowly, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You saved us, didn't you?" Nate murmured, running a hand down Rusty's neck. "You knew exactly what to do." Rusty nickered softly, his eyes meeting Nate's with a warmth that spoke volumes. "That horse is something special," Claire said, walking up beside him. "You're lucky to have him." Nate smiled, his earlier doubts and fears melting away. "No," he said quietly. "I think I'm the lucky one." In the days that followed, Nate repaired the damage to the field and the equipment shed, but the events of that night left a lasting impression on everyone who heard the story. Rusty became a local legend, the horse who had not only uncovered a mystery, but also saved the farm from disaster. Nate, for his part, made a promise to himself and to Rusty to never doubt the bond they shared and to always trust the instincts of the remarkable horse who had proven time and again that he was more than just an animal. He was family.